Welcome to HFY Beyond Terra, where humanity doesn't just survive, it becomes the galaxy's biggest surprise. Subscribe, and let's go beyond Terra.
The first thing Jalen Marrow noticed wasn't the blood. It was the silence. The jungle on Vesta 7 should have been deafening at dusk. Churring beetles, distant howlers, wind worrying the blue-leaf canopies. Instead, the world held its breath, as if the planet itself was listening. Jalen crouched at the edge of the ravine, one hand on the stock of his old coil rifle, the other steadying him against the wet rock. His field kit hummed softly at his hip, running passive scans, heat blooms, motion, electromagnetic spikes. 3 small heat signatures flickered under the ferns below, not animals, too regular, too clustered, too afraid. He angled his head, keeping his silhouette low against the sky. "All right," he muttered, mostly to himself. "Who are you and why are you hiding like you owe someone money?" A twig snapped behind him. Jalen rolled, rifle coming up, finger steady and not yet squeezing, because panic kills people faster than bullets. Nothing. Only the jungle again, settling into its own skin. Whatever had snapped the twig had moved away with the quiet competence of something that didn't want to be found. Predator. The scan agreed, faint, intermittent motion signatures, multiple, circling. Jalen exhaled through his teeth and slid down the ravine on careful boots, letting the wet clay smear his pants. He came to the cluster of ferns and found them. 3 girls, or what his brain insisted were girls before it caught up with the alien reality. They were small, delicate-limbed, wrapped in torn, iridescent fabric that shimmered like oil on water. Their skin was pale, almost luminous, with faint geometric patterns that pulsed when they breathed. Their eyes were too large for their faces, black with a thin ring of silver at the edge. Royal-looking, even half dead. One of them lifted her head and made a sound like a chime struck underwater, not a language he knew. Jalen raised his free hand, palm out. "Easy, I'm not." He stopped. "Not what? Not your enemy, not going to hurt you, not going to sell you for salvage." He'd meant any of it, and that was the problem. Out here, words were cheap. Only actions counted. He slowly unclipped his canteen, popped the seal, and set it on the ground between them. Then he pulled a ration bar from his pouch, snapped it in half, and set that down too. The 3 exchanged glances, quick, sharp, like a flock making a decision mid-flight. The smallest crawled forward, sniffed the canteen, and sipped. Her shoulders sagged with relief. The others followed more cautiously. Jalen watched their hands, no weapons, no obvious bio-implants, just fear and exhaustion and the faint, unmistakable aura of people who were used to others moving out of their way. "Okay," he said softly. "You're lost, you're hurt, and there's something up there that wants you quiet." He tilted his head, listening again. The circling motion grew closer. A thin whistle slid through the trees, not wind. A signal. The girls stiffened. One of them grabbed Jalen's sleeve with fingers that trembled. Her patterns flared bright, frantic. Jalen didn't need translation. "Yeah," he murmured. "I hear it too." He stood, slow and deliberate, so he didn't spook them. Then he extended his hand. They hesitated. Jalen did something he'd once seen an old medic do with a traumatized kid on a colony station. He turned his palm upward and held still, offering his hand like a platform instead of a grab. After a heartbeat, the tallest placed her hand in his. Her skin was warm, too warm, like she had a fever. "All right," Jalen said. "We're doing this my way. Follow close, keep low, and if I say run, you run." He started up the ravine, guiding them toward his camp. His camp wasn't much. A collapsible shelter wedged between two roots, a small thermal scrubber to hide his heat signature, and a boxy comm relay that worked only when the weather felt generous. Jalen wasn't a soldier anymore. He wasn't a hero. He was a contractor who'd taken a survey job because it was quiet, far from people, and paid in clean credits. Quiet didn't last. He got the girls into the shelter and wrapped them in spare thermal blankets. He scanned their vitals with his kit. The readouts were mostly nonsense, but the broad strokes were clear. Dehydration, bruising, mild toxin exposure, and stress levels that made his teeth hurt. One of them pointed at the med patch in his hand, then to a bruise on her forearm. "Yeah," Jalen said, "this is going to sting." He applied it. She flinched, then stared at him as if she'd expected pain to be followed by cruelty. When none came, her patterns dimmed to a gentler glow. The other two watched. Their fear didn't vanish. Fear doesn't do favors like that, but it shifted. It started looking for a place to sit. Outside, the jungle pressed in, listening. Jalen checked his perimeter sensors, multiple entities, low profile, moving with intelligence. Not the native predators, these didn't move like hungry animals. These moved like hunters. He tapped his comm relay, trying for an emergency ping. Static. Then faintly, unregistered signal, drift, repeat, nothing useful. Vesta 7 was a communications graveyard. He swore under his breath and started laying out his options. Option 1, move, get them to the river and follow it to the old landing strip 6 clicks west. Risk getting spotted. Option 2, stay, fortify, risk getting surrounded. Option 3, make enough noise that whoever hunted them decided it wasn't worth it. Jalen looked at the three aliens huddled together, blankets pulled up to their chins like children, eyes too big and too bright. He didn't know who they were, but he knew what it looked like when someone had been running a long time. He knelt in front of them, keeping his voice calm. "I need you to help me help you." They blinked. He pointed to himself. "Jalen." Then he tapped his chest twice. The tallest hesitated, then tapped her own chest. "Say," the smallest followed. "Luma." The third, with a stubborn set to her jaw despite the fear, said Vara. "All right," Jalen said. "Say, Luma Vara, good, now who is hunting you?" They exchanged glances again, and Say lifted her hand. She traced a symbol in the air, an angular shape like a hooked crown. Then she pointed toward the darkening trees. Vara made a sound, harsh and bitter, and mimed shackles closing around her wrists. Jalen's jaw tightened. Slavers, he guessed, or kidnappers, something in that neighborhood. Luma's patterns flashed, and she shook her head quickly, then pointed upward toward the sky. Jalen frowned. "Off-world?" Say nodded once, very small. Kidnapped off-world, crashed here, and now being tracked. That tracked. He ran a hand through his hair, then forced himself to breathe. "Okay, here's the thing. I'm one guy, not an army, but I've got two things slavers hate." He held up two fingers. "Stubbornness," he said, "and a bad habit of not knowing when to quit." They stared at him, uncomprehending. He smiled anyway, not because it was funny, but because sometimes a smile was a promise. "Stay here," he told them. "No noise. If anyone comes in that isn't me, bite them." Vara's eyes widened, then she made a soft, clicking sound that might have been laughter. Jalen took his rifle, grabbed his last two flash charges, and stepped into the night. The hunters came just after full dark. Jalen watched them through the scope from his crouch in the ferns, 30 meters from camp. They weren't native. Their armor had that ugly patchwork look of scavenged tech. Ceramic plates over mesh, helmets with cheap visors, weapons cobbled from 3 different manufacturers, 6 of them. Professionals in the way rats are professionals, good at surviving, good at taking. They moved carefully, checking ground, scanning branches, listening for breath. Jalen waited until the lead hunter crossed the small clearing, exactly where he'd buried a pressure tag tied to a flash charge. Click. The ground erupted in a burst of white-blue light and thunder. The hunter screamed, arms flailing, visor blinded. Jalen fired once, not to kill. Coil rounds were unforgiving, but he aimed for the weapon. The rifle flew from the hunter's hands, shattered. The others dropped, scattering like cockroaches. Jalen didn't stay in one place. He never stayed in one place. He shifted position, fired again, forcing them to keep their heads down. He tossed his second flash charge to the left, drawing two of them toward the sound, then moved right. The jungle helped him. Vesta 7's thick undergrowth swallowed sound and sight, turning every step into a rumor. The hunters shouted to each other in a guttural tongue. One broke cover, sprinting toward the shelter. Jalen's stomach dropped. No, he surged forward, legs burning, and tackled the hunter from behind. They hit the ground hard. The hunter's weapon went skidding into mud. The hunter swung an elbow, clipped Jalen's cheek. Stars burst behind his eyes. Jalen didn't let go. He jammed his forearm under the hunter's helmet seal and squeezed, not enough to crush, but enough to panic. The hunter gurgled, flailing. Jalen leaned in, voice low and savage. "Leave, now." The hunter's eyes, visible through the visor, flicked toward the shelter, then toward the jungle, then toward Jalen. Fear made the decision. The hunter shoved him off and scrambled backward, gasping, grabbing the broken weapon and retreating into the trees. Jalen lay in the mud for a heartbeat, breathing hard. Then he sat up and realized something. The hunters weren't pushing like they wanted a fight. They were probing, testing, trying to get close enough to confirm the targets. They didn't want to risk damage to cargo. Jalen wiped blood from his lip and smiled without humor. "Yeah," he whispered into the dark. "That's your mistake." He rose and began moving again, not toward camp, but away, making noise, breaking branches, firing a shot into the air. "Come after me." He led them on a chase through the jungle, dragging their attention like a bright cloth in front of bulls, circling back only when he was sure their patterns were tangled and their nerves frayed. By the time he slipped back to the shelter, the hunters were gone. For now. Inside, the girls huddled tighter when they saw the blood on his face. Jalen dropped to one knee. Nobody hurt. Essay shook her head. Vara stared at him, patterns pulsing rapidly, and lifted her hand to his cheek, hovering close without touching, as if the idea of comforting him was a foreign concept she'd only seen in stories. Luma made a soft, worried sound. Jalen swallowed. "Okay, we move at dawn." They traveled along the river just as the sky began to lighten with the planet's strange violet sunrise. Jalen took point, scanning constantly. He kept the girls close, showing them hand signals, stop, down, quiet, follow, until they mimicked him with quick intelligence. They weren't helpless, they'd just been hunted. At midday, they reached the old landing strip, a scar of cracked concrete half swallowed by vines. There was an ancient, calm tower leaning like a tired man. Jalen climbed it, fingers slipping on moss, and managed to jury-rig his relay into the tower's old dish. He powered it, watched the indicators flicker, and held his breath. A carrier signal popped, faint but real. Jalen keyed in a basic distress burst and added coordinates. Then, on impulse, he recorded a short voice message. "This is Jalen Marrow," he said. "Human National Independent Contractor. I have 3 off-world miners in my custody. They are injured and being pursued by armed individuals. Request extraction. Immediate. He paused, then added because he couldn't stop himself. If you're the kind of people who treat them like property, don't bother coming. I'll die here first. He sent it. The tower crackled. Somewhere above the clouds, the message became a beam, then a whisper, then maybe, if luck existed, someone's problem. He climbed down to find the girls waiting, eyes fixed on him like he was a door they desperately needed to stay open. "Signal out," he said. "Now we wait." The jungle, predictably, did not allow waiting. The hunters returned before sunset, but they didn't come alone. A sleek craft sliced through the trees overhead, engines quiet as a held breath. It hovered just above the canopy, its hull matte black and adorned with that hooked crown symbol Say had traced in the air. The slavers froze. One pointed at the craft, shouting. The craft answered with a burst of light that vaporized the ground at their feet, not a warning, a statement. The slavers scattered, some firing wildly into the trees. Jalen grabbed the girls and shoved them behind the concrete lip of the landing strip. Above, the craft descended. A ramp unfolded. Figures emerged, tall, armored, moving with a precision that made Jalen's skin prickle. Their armor wasn't patchwork. It was seamless, elegant, and terrifyingly expensive. Their helmets were smooth and reflective, hiding faces entirely. Royal Guard. The symbol on their shoulders matched Say's air drawing. One of them spoke, voice amplified, ringing with authority. The words weren't in any language Jalen knew, but the tone didn't need translation. "You hand them over." Jalen stood slowly, rifle held across his chest. Say, Luma, and Vara peeked from behind cover, patterns flickering nervously. The guards noticed instantly. Several shifted position, weapons lifting. Jalen felt the sightlines lock on him. He swallowed down the instinct to run. "Listen," he called, raising his free hand. "I don't know who you are, but I'm not your enemy." These kids, the guard who'd spoken, tilted their head. A second figure appeared at the top of the ramp. She didn't wear a helmet. She didn't need to. She wore a long mantle of dark fabric that flowed as if underwater and a crown that looked like living metal, thin arcs that curved around her head, never touching her hair. Her skin glowed with the same geometric patterns as the girls, but hers were steady, controlled, and bright as starlight. Her eyes, silver-ringed black, fell on the girls. Say made a sound and ran forward. "Mother!" she cried, except it was mother, not in any tongue Jalen knew. But the word hit him anyway, the way meaning sometimes did when it didn't bother with language. The queen descended the ramp in a smooth, swift walk. The girls rushed to her, clinging to her robe, their patterns flashing wildly with relief and grief and something like shame. The queen gathered them to her, hands gentle, forehead touching each of theirs. She spoke softly to them, and their glow steadied. Then she looked at Jalen, and the air changed. It wasn't just attention, it was gravity. The guards tightened around her like a closing fist. The queen's gaze flicked to Jalen's bloodied cheek, his torn sleeves, the rifle he held not as a threat but as a promise. She said something to her guard captain. The captain turned to Jalen and spoke, this time in rough, accented trade. "Human, you are the protector." Jalen stared. "I'm just the guy who found them." The captain's visor tilted. "You fought the hunters." "I discouraged them," Jalen said. The queen stepped forward and her guards moved with her, a living wall. She stopped close enough that Jalen could see the fine texture of her patterns, like constellations mapped onto skin. She spoke, and the captain translated haltingly as if the queen's words were too precise for him. "My daughters say you did not take them," the queen said. "You did not trade them. You did not fear the hunters more than your own death." Jalen felt his throat tight. They were kids. That's not a high bar. The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly. It is among many. There was a pause, then the Queen lifted her hand. Jalen tensed, but she didn't strike him. She touched 2 fingers to his forehead, a gesture that felt like being marked by a star. The patterns on her hand flared. A warmth spread across Jalen's skin, not painful, but intimate, like a brand that didn't burn. The guard captain stiffened. The girl's eyes widened. Jalen swallowed. What did you just? The captain's voice came out strained. She has given you the mark of shelter. Jalen blinked. The what? The captain looked as if he didn't want to answer. The mark, he said carefully, means you are under the Queen's protection. Harm to you is crime against the throne. Jalen stared at the Queen. I didn't do this for, the Queen interrupted, speaking again. The captain translated more softly. You did it because it was right, the Queen said. That is why it must be answered. Jalen let out a shaky breath. Okay, then answer it by getting them somewhere safe. The Queen's gaze flicked to the jungle where the slavers had fled. Her expression hardened. They will be safe, she said. Jalen's mouth tightened. And the slavers, the Queen's voice went cold enough to frost steel. They will learn, she said, that my daughters are not prey. The aftermath came fast. The royal craft deployed drones, small, silent, deadly, that vanished into the trees. The Queen's guards swept the landing strip, checking every angle, scanning for trackers. Within minutes, the slavers' calm chatter died as if someone had pinched a line shut. Jalen didn't ask what happened. He didn't need the details to know it was final. Say, Luma and Vara stayed near him while the Queen spoke with her captain. They kept touching his sleeve, his hand, the back of his arm, small, grounding gestures that said real, real, real. Vara looked up at him, eyes bright. Jalen, she said carefully, then pressed her hand to her chest. Debt, Jalen sighed. No, not debt. He glanced at the Queen, then back to Vara. You don't owe me. Vara's patterns pulsed stubbornly. She pointed to his bruised cheek, then made a sweeping gesture that encompassed the jungle. Life, she said. Jalen had no answer for that, so he did the only thing he could. He ruffled her hair gently, like she was human. Vara froze, then made that soft, clicking laugh again, as if surprised that affection could be so simple. The Queen approached. Up close, she smelled like rain and something metallic like lightning. She studied Jalen for a long moment, then spoke. The captain translated. You are far from your kin. Jalen gave a short laugh. That's one way to put it. The Queen's eyes softened just a fraction. Why are you here, human Jalen Marrow? He shrugged. Work, solitude, bad decisions. The Queen tilted her head, considering him like a puzzle she didn't yet resent. Then she said, My daughters say you called them children. Because they are. In my people, the Queen said, princesses are taught early that trust is dangerous. Jalen met her gaze. In my people, we teach kids that adults are supposed to be safe. A ripple of something passed through the Queen's patterns, uncertain, like a thought touching something new. She looked at her daughters, who were watching the exchange with breath held. Then she looked back at Jalen. My court will want to know why a human risked his life for strangers. Jalen snorted. Tell them humans are unpredictable. The Queen's mouth curved slightly, barely a smile, but real. They already believe that. Jalen's face grew serious. Your guards showed up fast, but those slavers were here first. How did they find them? The Queen's expression tightened. There is rot in many places, even among stars. Jalen nodded slowly. Yeah, I know the type. The Queen studied him again. Come with us. Jalen blinked. What? The captain's visor tilted. The Queen offers transport and audience. Jalen lifted both hands. Look, I appreciate the rescue, but I'm not stepping onto an alien royal ship without a lawyer and a meal plan. One of the guards shifted, offended. The queen raised a hand and the guard stilled. She spoke again and the captain translated with evident relief. You fear obligation, the queen said. You fear being owned. Jalen's chest tightened. I've seen what owed turns into. I'm not for sale. The queen's gaze hardened, not with anger, but with respect sharpened to a blade. Nor am I, she said. That is why I ask, not command. She gestured to the mark on his forehead. You carry my shelter now. The hunters who remain will hunt you as they hunted my daughters because you interfered. Jalen's stomach sank. The queen continued. If you stay, you may die. If you come, you may live. Jalen stared at the jungle. He imagined the slavers, survivors, crawling back to whatever ship had brought them, whispering his face into bounty networks. He imagined the next group that came would be smarter, meaner, not afraid to burn the forest down to get what they wanted. He looked down at Say, Luma, and Vara. They were watching him like the choice mattered more than their own survival. Jalen swallowed, feeling something in him, something stubborn and stupid and human, curl into place. All right, he said finally. I'll come. But not as property, not as a trophy, not as some human pet your court shows off. The queen's eyes gleamed. Agreed, Jalen exhaled. And one more thing, the queen waited. Jalen pointed toward the jungle. Those slavers weren't just after your daughters. They'll go after someone else, somewhere else, if you're going to make an example. His voice went quiet, hard. Make it loud enough that the next monster thinks twice. The queen's patterns flared like a sunrise. And for the first time, Jalen understood something about her that had nothing to do with crowns. She wasn't gentle because she was weak. She was gentle because she chose to be. When she spoke, the captain's translation came out almost reverent. We will, the queen said, and when my court asks what kind of species produces men who throw themselves between children and darkness, her gaze pinned him bright and fierce. I will tell them the truth. Jalen raised an eyebrow. Which is? The queen's slight smile returned, sharper this time. That humanity, she said, is a problem for those who prey on the helpless. Say, Luma and Vara crowded closer to him as the ramp lowered again. The guards formed up, escorting them with the wary respect reserved for a dangerous thing that had proven it could bite. Jalen stepped onto the ramp, feeling the ship's quiet power hum under his boots. Behind him, the jungle whispered. Ahead of him, a queen waited, daughters safe at her side, and a universe full of people who had never met a human who refused to look away. Jalen touched the mark on his forehead, then glanced down at the princesses. Okay, he said, voice rough. Rule 1, you stay behind me in crowds. Vara clicked her tongue and pointed at herself. Rule 1, she corrected, patterns pulsing with mischief. You stay behind us. Jalen stared at her, then laughed, one sharp burst that felt like a door opening in his chest. The queen watched them, and her expression softened in a way that didn't belong to politics. Perhaps, Jalen thought, this wasn't just a rescue. Perhaps it was the start of something far more dangerous to the galaxy's predators. A human with nothing left to lose. 3 princesses who had learned what safety felt like. And a queen who had just discovered an unexpected truth. That sometimes the fiercest shield in the universe wasn't made of metal. Sometimes it was made of a stubborn, messy, infuriating species that looked at monsters and said, "Not today."